Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this February 27th, 2024. Tonight we cover a topic that we never have before, and really when you look around, nobody else has either. It's religious trauma. Something that people need to talk more about because it's actually one of the biggest issues that leads to people leaving their respective religions or the religions they grew up with. We're going to have a new guest tonight, April Norrod, to come on and discuss this from a psychological vantage point using her more than 2 decades worth of experience to analyze this situation. It's going to be a show like no other. Don't go anywhere. Well, hello, everyone. Once again, I am Bishop Brian Willett, your host for Vestiges After Dark tonight, together with my co-host, Jamie Wolf.
Hey, everybody.
And we are going to be tackling an interesting topic tonight. We'll get started with that in the second segment here before we get into this. For if you're new to the show, I just want to remind you that this is a church-sponsored broadcast, okay? We don't have any other sponsors. The church pays for this. And even though it is a show that is church-sponsored, it does not make it a churchy show. We don't preach here. We try to teach good theology when the subject comes up, and tonight it's going to be a little bit of religion and a little bit of psychology. Most of the time, though, we're talking about the paranormal or metaphysics or esotericism on the show. And, we cover the gamut typically with questions anyway. So no matter what we cover, I'm sure that you'll find something of interest to yourself here tonight. And I think you're going to find it to be a really enlightening time if you spend it with us. But if you do enjoy this show and if you do find value in it, please support it. Okay, all you have to do is go over to the our website, esotericcatholic.org or Nicolean.org, Nicholean, and just click the donate button there in the margins, and please give us a donation if you find value here. Again, what the church really needs is monthly pledges. So if you can give a monthly donation, even if it's a small amount, it'll make a huge difference to keeping this show on the air and to being able to help us to reach more people. And I've got some really exciting news for you tonight. So I'm going to get to that in a moment as well. I think you're going to really like what I have to say. Also, I want to give a big shout out to our volunteers. Tonight we have Paula Moosh, Brandon, of course. I'm sure Tracy's out there somewhere. And then, of course, Jamie's right here with me, and Father Chris is also here. And they'll be checking on the various platforms. We are simulcasting for the first time tonight to everything. So Instagram, you should have us. We weren't able, for some reason, Instagram wasn't taking the feed for the last 2 episodes, but tonight it seems to be. Let me know if there's any issues. Not that I can really do much about it, but I want to know whether or not it works. If you're on Facebook, you should be watching us there. If you're on Twitch, you can see us. If you're on The Exorcist Bishop on Instagram, you'll find us there too, as well as audio only on Spreaker, live in all these places. Most people come to YouTube though, but we're able to see your comments on all of the platforms on our screen. So Jamie's got eagle eyes, and she'll be writing your questions down or your comments. And you can also call into the show when we open the lines, which will be probably in the second hour. Okay, I'll start opening lines and you can call into the show. I'll give you the phone number. I'll put it on the screen, all that good stuff. So that's it. I want to just, before we get started here tonight, I just want to mention that. So calling in also from Australia, we have Father Chris as usual. How you doing tonight, Father?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Still slightly exhausted from my move, if I'm honest.
I can't. There's nothing worse.
Finding my way.
There's nothing worse than moving is like the worst trauma. I think it really is. It's the worst like non-abusive trauma. Although I think it's its own kind of abuse, honestly. But it's like the trauma that you kind of do to yourself out of necessity because you can't always stay in one place, right? But I've never had a move that was good.
There's also the bureaucratic abuse, that you realize just how much of our lives are controlled by the government.
Let's not get started on that.
In this country, for example, voting is compulsory, not just in general elections for the federal parliament, but also the state parliaments and even the council elections. They are compulsory. You get fined if you don't vote.
Oh wow!
And so if you don't update the electoral roll, the fines can stack up, right?
Yeah,
that's unbelievable.
So I'd been here. I thought you do the power and the internet and all of that sort of stuff, and then you think, I think I've done everything, but there's this nagging thing in the back of your mind. You go, I've not updated the electoral roll, and and the council elections are all at different times depending on council area, so you can easily start stacking up. Fine.
Wow.
It's outrageous, really.
That is outrageous. Unbelievable.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
But that's the Constitution. No, I know. No, I think it's the only country in the Western world that I know of where voting is compulsory.
That's very strange. Yeah. Wow.
So I think the idea
time for an amendment, Father. Time for an amendment.
Yeah, that would make me not go for real.
Agree. Well, their idea was that it would encourage greater participation in politics, but actually, I've never lived in a country where the people are more apathetic.
It would encourage the opposite in me if you were telling me.
Well, that's it. As soon as you tell somebody they have to do something, it loses its intrinsic value. That's the whole story that we get from Adam and Eve in the Book of Genesis, and we never learn our lesson. We never learn our lesson.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like the census form, where they phone up their dad and say, what religion are we? So I can tick the right box on the census form. Right. They phone them up from the voting booth and say, who is it we vote for? Yeah. So you get this entrenched two-party duopoly where there's like a few seats between them.
Makes no sense. Makes no sense.
It's bonkers.
From Tennessee, we have Brandon Milam tonight. How you doing, Brandon?
Hey, Brandon.
I'm doing pretty good. I don't have half as much issues as you do, Father Chris. I moved a couple weeks ago, so that's already passed.
Well, I mean,
Brandon's
it's
in recovery.
He's chilling. I saw him playing video games earlier. He's having a good time, so he's good. So, what's that?
I will say, got the drink ready,
okay,
and I think we're going to have a fantastic show tonight.
I think we are. I think it's going to be a good one, and it's a good, important topic. Yep. Before I give you my announcement, we go right into questions from the ether. Let's do liturgical libation. So what do we got tonight?
We've had this before. It's a Japanese whiskey. I believe it's called Tenwaku. And
Tenjaku.
Yeah. I apologize. We've had it before. I have gotten to where I really love Japanese whiskeys.
Well, they're very sweet, and you like the sweet.
Yeah. I've got another one at the house that I bought. The bottle is a nice Gothic shape with a gargoyle on top.
There you go.
I can't remember the name of it right now, but it is really good. And so this is going to have your typical caramel, vanilla.
Your half
green apple. So I'm going to have a Jamie pour.
Catholic pour.
Yeah, proper Catholic pour.
The Catholic pour comes after the show for me.
So this has good notes of the green apples, nuts, caramel, vanilla.
Cheers. Yeah, that's all those dessert.
Oh man, I mean, come on.
It's got that wonderful Japanese.
If anybody wants to get into Japanese whiskey, I would definitely tell you to start this one. The Tenjaku whiskey, pure malt whiskey
It's a good one.
of Japan. Yep.
We've got a few upstairs, and they've all been very enjoyable.
pretty much
They're
any
very
whiskey
different than Scotland's whiskey. I mean, it's not Scotch, even though they kind of equate it to Scotch. It's made in the same way. It just goes to show you that technique matters, location matters, and you really can taste the location. The French have a word for that. It's called terroir. It's like the earth gets into the substance that produces the drink.
Well, with the Japanese, you have that that need to master everything,
Yes.
and they are quickly becoming the masters of making.
Well,
whiskey.
that's it. Japanese whiskey is very balanced and precise and mathematical.
They have their rituals. They have their,
I would say Japanese whiskey is the science of whiskey, whereas Scottish whiskey, Scotch is the art form of whiskey making. It's more artistic. It's more expressive.
Right.
It's less technical.
It's a samurai sword versus a claymore.
It's exactly right. That's a good way to
have
put
both
it.
at the house.
That is so true.
Yeah, it is true.
And you do need two hands to drink a good Scotch, I'll tell you.
You ever held a Scottish claymore? You'll definitely.
You might need three hands.
Yeah.
Huh? Well, let me get to my announcement tonight for all of you out there before we start with questions from the ether. If you're new to the show, we always have the first segment where we just sort of chat. We talk about the drink that we're having for the evening, and then we answer questions that come in either through email or on social media over the previous weeks and sort of discuss what's on your minds. Okay, so that's what we do in the first, and I'm saying this only because we're, for the first time, simulcasting to all of the social media platforms, and there might be a lot of people that never saw this show, didn't even know about it, so just if we have new audience members tonight, now you know. But here's the announcement. Okay, so this week, the church put in an offer for a public property. Okay, so we are now currently under contract to purchase a about little under 3 acres of land, and it's going to it has a house on it. Okay, and the reason we decided to go with a house is the nature of our congregation and the nature of our outreach. Okay, this church has never operated as a traditional, conventional parish. So as much as it would be nice to have a large traditional church with the stained glass windows and the big nave and everything else, it's not realistic for this particular church to do. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, we're in Georgia. Okay. And number two, we're an esoteric church. Those two things don't necessarily go very well together. Esotericism, as an esoteric Catholic church, okay, it's not going to appeal to the masses in the same way. The people that are interested in the particular version of Catholicism that we practice here are going to be more exclusive, in the sense that they're going to be more scattered out there in the world, and there's going to be far and few between. And even out of that far and few between, there's only going to be a handful of them that even know about us or find us. So this church is supported by a modest congregation of people that are all over the world, and only 4 of them are right here in Georgia. Okay, so there's no point in spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on building a church or buying an existing one, which would probably be in the millions at this point if you were to buy an existing church. There would be just no point to that. It would be a waste of money. Not to mention that if something were to happen where the church budget collapses and now we have to divest ourselves of some of this property, nobody wants to buy a church. Okay, so they just lose money. The land can retain value, but the building doesn't always. And so a house, though, typically always goes up, or at least holds value for the long term. And so we thought a house makes more sense. So the upstairs of this property, okay, has 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms upstairs, with a kitchen, a dining room, and a breakfast nook with a living room. And that can be the retreat house for our congregants who are registered members of the church,
right,
pledged members that support the church. They can come whenever they want and stay there completely free of charge and receive the sacraments I can hear their confessions, whatever they might need. If they have new child in the family, they want to bring them for baptism, now they can come. The downstairs is going to have 2 public offices and the chapel, the public chapel with a sacristy and another bathroom down there for when people come to Mass. Now that's going to be open to everybody who wants to come. Okay, we'll have our Mass schedule published, and they can come to Mass. And it's also where we can conduct problem resolution. So this is also going to serve as the location for the spiritual hospital that we've always talked about. And we'll be able to help people from all walks of life, any kind of religion that they might belong to. We can now have a place to come and talk to them and see what we can do to help them. For Christians, there'll be a place to come for services. And we feel that this is going to make much more sense in the long term. And if it doesn't work for whatever reason, because there's just not enough community support, or, at least it's a house that will be easy to sell, because we're not making any major modifications to it. We're just simply, anything we do will be improving it for the purposes of a house, since it's going to be mostly a house anyway. So Father Chris, when you come in October, you have a place you can stay. You can stay in the retreat house, and you'll probably have it all to yourself.
Excellent.
Yeah, it'll be.
That's such good news.
It is. It should be at least one.
Not just for me.
No. It's good news for everybody. It's good news for everybody. The other thing that's nice about this is it's going to now allow us for the first time to finally implement what we've talked about for so long, a demonology program. So many people have wanted me to teach them demonology. I don't teach demonology unless there's a reason for it. It's kind of like the church doesn't consecrate a bishop until there's a need for a bishop. You just don't make bishops for the hell of it. You don't just make bishops because people want to be bishops. Okay, they shouldn't want to be bishops anyway, and they are. They mind if they do. The worst reason. You only consecrate a bishop when there is a need for one. Okay, even in the Roman Catholic Church, this is how they operate. Never having more bishops than they need. It's always to serve a particular community that the current bishop or whatever cannot fulfill on his own. So it's the same thing goes with demonology. We don't need people that are just curious about demonology. I'm not teaching a course in demonology just because it's an interesting, fascinating topic. I could probably make a lot of money doing that, but I don't want to do that. What I will do, though, is I will teach demonology if I am training them to become legitimate demonologists that would serve the church. And that's exactly what we're now going to be able to start offering once everything is set up there, once we've closed on the property and we have taken possession of it, and we can start to get those offices working and get that chapel up and running. Okay, which means we're going to need lots of donations to support that too. So if you really believe in what we're doing, please help us. And
getting the house is one thing. There's going to be some small items we're going to need to fix and update, and then we'd have no furniture.
No furniture.
So we'll be starting from scratch on that.
Exactly. And we're, and of course there's still monthly costs that you add, electrical, pest control, water, insurance. All of this increases the monthly expenses of the church, which are already stretched very thin. This church has been breaking even for the last 2 years. So this is going to, without extra support, we're going to start falling under. And I want to give a big shout out to all of you benefactors that
Absolutely.
have upped your donations. You guys are amazing, because you're really the reason we're able to even think about doing this. I'm going on faith that we're going to be able to get what the rest of what the church needs. But at the present time, we are now going to start going into the hole with this. Okay. There's a difference between infrastructure donations and monthly budgeted pledges. And, infrastructure donations sometimes come easier than monthly regular support. So we need more monthly regular support. And remember that when you listen to this show, the church is paying for this for you. Okay. And if you get something out of it, then help it to continue to help reach other people. If you're benefiting from it, think of all the other people that could benefit from these services if we could do more and be able to keep this whole thing going. But this is something that we'll now going to be able to do. And remember, if you become a pledged member, you now will have access to the retreat house. You can come and spend some time with us, come to Mass and take a spiritual retreat. We won't charge you for that. If you're a benefactor, we're not going to charge you for it, okay? And we're not, we're really at the present time only opening it up to our existing benefactors. So if you've been a long-term follower of what we do, then please support us and become a registered member by pledging a monthly amount, and then you can come to see us whenever you want, and you have a place to stay completely free of charge. Just get yourself here. So that's what we're working on. We should be, if everything goes well with inspection tomorrow, and we should be closing on the 12th, I think. And that means we can get started right after that to at least get it functional. It might not look all that great. I mean, it's a very nice house. It's in very good condition, actually. But like I said, it's bare on the inside. So we have to, it's not going to probably look too furnished in the beginning. We're going to have to work towards that. But physical donations would help too. If you want to donate a bedroom set or something like that, you just have to be able to get it to us. We don't have a way to pick it up. Anyway, I thought you'd all be excited about that. So look for my announcements on the Nicolaitan Network or on Facebook at Exorcist Bishop on Facebook. I will let you know when the demonology program opens. There are going to be certain criteria that you're going to have to follow to become a member in this capacity. I'm going to be training demonologists to be leadership roles, and understand that this is going to come with ordination to the minor orders up to the order of exorcist. That way you'll be able to perform as a lay minister most of the solutions that are afforded you by virtue of your baptism. You won't be able to perform solemn exorcisms, but you'll be trained in how to do minor ones for property, not on people, but on property.
Right.
And you'll even be able to do limited house blessings by virtue of these minor orders. And it's a lay order. It doesn't have any impact on whether or not you're male or female in this church. Okay. The sacramental theology is different. That's why we don't ordain in this church females to the we have deaconesses too. We have the capacity for, but it's not holy orders.
Still got to get back into my training for that.
That's right. That would be good. Yeah, we need more deaconesses.
We have a good.
But
lot to do it in now.
Holy orders we have to restrict because of sacramental theology, but minor orders we do not have to restrict. It kind of falls under the same commission that they have in the Roman Catholic Church now for Eucharistic ministers and lectors and things like that. We've just maintained the old system, and it is an ordination. It's a lay ordination, and it's open to male and female. The only thing that would be required of you to receive this ordination would be that this is when being Catholic does matter. So most of the time, if you're just coming to this church to receive the sacraments, as long as you're a baptized Christian, I really don't care about the rest, okay? But if you want to serve this church as a minister of this church, as a demonologist for this church, then your Catholicity does matter, because you have to have a understanding of the Catholic faith. And so therefore, confirmation in the Catholic faith or Orthodox faith is necessary. And nothing we can't take care of. But if you don't have this, you'll have to be catechized before you can receive any minor orders. It's part of the prerequisite to it. But again, each case will be different. We'll even look at some programs for people that just want to come into groups that are existing. But if you want to lead your own group, you're going to be literally an adjunct minister of the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church under this patriarchate. So pretty exciting developments, and hopefully it will allow us to reach more people around the world and help you. I'll teach you how to identify actual possessions. And then when you come across one, if you think you found one, we'll analyze it, we'll assess it, and then I'll come out, we'll come out and I will work with your team to resolve it. Jamie and I both will. And Tracy too, because that's my primary team of exorcist assistants. You won't be able to perform solemn exorcisms or exorcisms on people. That's reserved for the priesthood. But everything else,
anything
should be able to resolve.
Anything you've seen me do is what you'll be doing.
And that's 99% of what you're going to end up encountering anyway. Possession's very rare. All right, demonic possession's very rare. You're not going to encounter that very much. And even some demonic attachments can be broken with just a simple minor orders. They can. Sometimes just giving a person a house blessing and doing the office of the dead is all that's required to get rid of most hauntings. So very exciting times. Make sure that you're watching us closely so you know what is in store. Okay. All right, Brandon, let's get started with our first question tonight.
So our first question comes from April. She says, I am rereading the book of Genesis, and I was reminded that God refers to himself in the plural. What are your thoughts or understandings of that?
Okay, so
It's the royal we. It's the royal we.
yes, exactly. It's Elo. They're talk about the Hebrew term Elohim, which is a plural. God would say, us, and some people have tried to make this some kind of foreshadowing of the Holy Trinity, but it does not mean that. It's exactly what Father Chris said. It's called plural of majesty, is what it's referred to as. And essentially in Hebrew, when God is speaking, or somebody's speaking about God, if the word for God is matched with a singular verb and adjective, it will be used as a plural. Okay, and it's to emphasize his greatness, because and there is a sort of plurality to it, because his grace accompanies him with everything that he does. The majesty of his court accompanies him with every movement that he makes. So therefore it is a more dynamic thing than just one singular being that is present. It is the entirety of his majesty that's present, which is part of what's trying to be conveyed here in the Hebrew, but is not to imply that we're talking about multiple gods or that God's multiple people. That's not what it's saying. And that would actually be... Go ahead.
I mean, the kings and queens of England use it.
Yeah.
Because especially true certainly of Her Late Majesty, because she was from that era, and like you say, it's when referring to herself, she'd say we, because she represents both herself and the nation. So she's representing a plurality of things, but she's not a plural person. She's one person.
Correct.
And so. That's where this sense of the we comes from. It's the unification. So in God's the ultimate one, in God's sense, it's the unification of God as personal relationship with you, but also God as the very act of being. So all of these things are present in God, and so it's that use of plural, because it would, as you've said, it would be completely wrong to talk about that referring to the Trinity, because in the Trinity there is no we, there's a unity,
right?
So it is this kind of... Margaret Thatcher infamously and I think deliberately trod on this territory, because when her son had a child, she said we are a grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, people in Britain were like, no, you don't get to say that. You're the Prime Minister, you're not the Queen. But that's the sense of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, even I do it, but not necessarily in that same sense. But I will often, when I'm speaking on behalf of the church, I will say we do this, because when I speak as a patriarchal authority, I'm always speaking with the church. So it's all of us. Every member of this church, along with me, is making that declaration, and that's kind of the same thing here in that same context. So, yeah, Elohim as a plural is not to imply that God is actually really a whole bunch of gods, working together. That's not what it's implying at all. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, very good. What's our next one?
Okay, so the second question, how can you reconcile the fact that God from Judaism and Christianity created the world, yet there are religions older than them?
Well, very easily, because Judaism and Christianity did not exist, or Judaism, I should say, did not exist prior to Abraham. So any religion that came about prior to Abraham, or was existent at the time of Abraham anywhere else in the world, would have been part of the same, I guess you could say, blackout of awareness of God that existed before he started to reveal himself. So God first reveals himself through the process of bringing humanity back into his fold with Abraham as that first starting point, because that's where the whole point of all of his descendants being as numerous as the stars is really speaking to, because he is the father of the Abrahamic religions, the three primary religions of the West: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We all trace our origin back to him. Hinduism, for example, is older than that. In fact, there's some reports that could say that primitive Hinduism goes back as much as 7,000 to 10,000 years, much older than Abraham, much older than anything that we hear about in terms of the origins of Judaism. And so there being older religions has no bearing on the authenticity of Judaism and Christianity, because the reason Judaism and Christianity came about is because God started to reveal himself again after the fall. It's the first time that he actually reveals himself in this very deliberate way. And then that's when the process of salvation begins, through his interaction with Abraham. In fact, the whole point of Abraham is really about that, is that showing the compassion and mercy of God when he's appealing, would you save the city for just, one person, that whole story is wonderful, because it's really a foreshadowing of the salvation that is to come and how merciful God really is. Prior to that, we didn't really have that understanding.
And that's why St. Paul draws on the character of Abraham in the letter to the Romans. Because he makes the point to the even though he's a Jew and he's steeped in that, he's actually arguing with his own people to say, listen, before you start rejecting Christ, just remember that Abraham was counted righteous before the law. In other words, God chose Abraham before there was Judaism, and so there's an affirmation both in the Old and the New Testaments that. That obviously God creation predates the revelation of God that becomes the Abrahamic code, the Mosaic law, and then is fulfilled in the person of Christ. So,
because we didn't have that revelation didn't mean that humanity wasn't curious and reaching out and trying to understand its place in the universe. It still had its spirituality; it just didn't understand it, and God was not revealed yet. And so therefore humanity had to wing it. And that's why you really have all of these different variations of religion that are culturally defined, because that's where it comes from. The lack of revelation. This is what makes Judaism and Christianity significant, because these are the vehicles through which God decided to reveal himself in that special, unique way. No other religion can make that claim. And interestingly enough, no other religion does. No, other than Islam, but they just see themselves as the correction of Judaism and all the mistakes of Judaism and Christianity. That's how they see it. But in a way, even though we don't accept that, they are still kind of in the same mode, because they trace it back to Abraham again. So, Brandon, does that answer it? Because that was really your question, right?
Yes, it did answer it. Okay.
Good.
So the final question.
Well, hold off on that one, because we just got one on Instagram that I would just want. It's very quick, and I wanted to mention it. Paul, one of our moderators saw this on Instagram. What does a benefactor do? Well, a benefactor is a regular supporter of a particular charity. So a benefactor really doesn't do anything other than they believe in the particular mission of a charity and they support it, usually financially. So that's what a benefactor does. And
I think also it would benefit, Bishop, if you reminded people that, in fact, the church is also a registered charity.
It is. Yeah, we are.
US, or it's a legitimate
It
organization.
is. We are definitely a legitimate legal 501c3. Under the IRS tax codes for the United States of America, which means we are federally tax exempt, and we have a church determination, which means that as far as the United States government is concerned, the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church is a fully legal church, and it is a fully legal nonprofit corporation. Okay. So your donations to it are tax exempt. And even physical donations are tax exempt. You get a receipt for them for their value that if but you typically, unfortunately, the dark side to this is that you have to tend to donate a lot of money for it to actually count against your taxes.
Yeah.
People that donate small amounts are not going to really see the benefit of tax exemption with it's for people that are donating larger sums. Typically speaking, it's to give incentives to wealthier people.
Keep if you're in the US, keep an eye on bracket creep. If you're nearing the bracket for higher taxation, then you might actually save money by giving to the church.
It's true, you could, and we do have benefactors that make use of that. That's true. But anyway, yes, that.
But I think it's important for people to know that it's absolutely
legal. Yeah. If you don't think we're a church, we're a church, that's fine. But the United States government does. So
yeah,
go to the Secretary of State website in Georgia and look us up.
Yeah, we're there, and we are fully tax exempt. Okay, sorry, Brandon. What's our next question?
You're good. The third question comes from Cassie. She said, "I have a question about natal charts. If a certain sign is in a house, does that mean that the person behaves as that sign or is attracted to that sign in some external way?"
Oh, okay. So we're talking about astrology here, the 12 houses of a natal chart.
Yes.
Yeah. Your personality is defined in astrology by the entirety of it, every aspect of it. So, where the houses show where the particular conditions exist in their extreme. So if you look at the zodiacal signs, they tell you what's going on, the nature of what's going on. So, for example, the sun is your personality, your external personality, while the moon is your emotional nature. Venus is your relationship, typically intimate relationships. Okay. Mars is your more external drives and aggressions and so it shows you the what of what's going on. The houses show you the where. So each part of the sky is divided into 12 sections. The six sections above us at the horizon and 6 sections below us underneath the planet. And those houses are different shapes based upon where you are in the world. Okay, but if a particular planet or sign happens to be inside that house, it will affect what that house means. So the first house is again about the self-identity. The second house is about finances. Third house about your mental activity. Fourth house about your family. Okay. And so if you have a sign in those particular categories, it's going to influence how that works. So for example, if the 4th house, which is the house of family and your internal life, is in Cancer, which is a sign in the zodiac that is very family oriented, you're going to be an extremely family focused kind of person, because you've got a Cancerian sign in the house of family. And that's kind of how that works, okay? But take someone like me, for example. My moon is in Capricorn, all right? And Capricorn is a cold sign, very unemotional, very logical and rational. And so you have the moon, which is the seat of the emotions, being ruled by Capricorn, which is very much the opposite, which means that moon and Capricorns tend to be very cool, very unemotional, hide their emotions, or even are detached from them themselves. And even though my sun sign is a Cancer, which tends to be a very emotional sign because it's a water sign, and Cancers tend to be moody.
I'm very moody.
I, with a Capricorn moon, have far more control over my emotions than most Cancers do. And that's why a lot of people might not even realize I'm a Cancer, unless you know me. If you know me, then I let the...
He's a Cancer.
But you got to know me to know it.
Yeah, you got to know him for a while first.
Yeah. So that's how that works. So you can't say that just because you have you're always going, every sign's going to be in one of the 12 houses. I mean, that's an inevitability with astrology, because those planets and those signs are somewhere in the sky, and the sky is the 12 houses of the zodiac. I'm sorry, the 12 houses of a natal chart encompass the entirety of the zodiac in the sky. So every house is going to be ruled by a particular sign. It's not going to influence your personality towards a particular sign unless that sign is in a particular house that does this. So for personality, we'd be looking at the first house. So whatever sign your first house is in, it's going to really be a major drive in how that person behaves and how their personality is shown to the rest of the world. But if they're, the seventh house is relationships, particularly close relationships or intimate relationships. So whatever sign people's seventh house are in, it's going to be the kind of lover they are. Okay, so it's not, astrology is never just one thing. It's
not the lover you're looking for, the lover you are.
Yes, and to a certain extent, because like attracts like,
right.
You might actually do better looking for somebody that matches the attributes of your seventh house. But again, you can't say that exclusively because there's other factors at work in a natal chart that affect how people might behave or operate, or what their inclinations might be. Very different. Astrology is not reading horoscopes in the newspaper.
No.
Okay, and astrology is not like the devil's science. All right, that's all nonsense. Okay, what astrology is literally looking at ancient energy patterns and archetypal patterns that are being put together through the channels of synchronicity to tell you something about yourself. It's based on the esoteric principle of the butterfly effect. It is essentially just a full-scale realization of that very thing. But these things exist whether you believe in them or not, whether you like them or not. They just are what they are. The real issue that people have, I think, with the real issue I think people have with astrology is that they are being taught that anything that has any remote association with the occult or witchcraft is of the devil. But
Westboro just chimed in. They said we're going to hell.
Oh yeah,
I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't be surprised. They would. I'm not surprised.
We will
see there, guys. See there.
Yeah, we'll see there. Yeah.
Save me a seat up front.
I mean, if they're really out there, I'll be like, well, you first. First.
Let me hold the door for you.
I'm certainly not protesting at soldiers' funerals and telling people that they're that they should die. Well, that's it. Any questions about that, Brandon?
Yes, we had a follow-up question from the chat room. They asked, so does your sign move in and out of the house, or is the house permanent?
Whatever signs that your natal chart shows, basically, you're going to have a planet in a sign that is in a house. All right, which is going to show you the where, the what, and the how. Right? The what is the sign, the zodiacal sign. The where is the house, and the how is the planet. Okay, and what you're trying to do with this is put them together almost like a matrix. Okay, it's like a puzzle that has to be put together. But your natal chart is fixed. It does not change. The transits change, and so you become influenced. Your chart and your aggregate structure that it represents becomes influenced by the changes in time. So sometimes there will be conditions in astrology that are auspicious or inauspicious, depending upon what your natal chart configuration shows. Right. And if there are signs that will work in opposition to your natal chart, then you're going to have a rough year if that happens. But likewise, the opposite could be true. Things could line up perfectly. You have these wonderful conjunctions where good things happen. But no, your natal chart is fixed. The moment you are born, right down to the minute, determines where they are and what they show. And that does not change throughout the rest of your life. But that doesn't mean it's deterministic. That, I think, is the true sin of divination and things like astrology. That is sinful, is to see it as deterministic. It is not deterministic. All it does is show you the potentials you have to work with, but that doesn't mean you have to be that way. Look, I mean, there are people that are blind and they succumb to their blindness and they just sit in darkness and do nothing. There are other people that actually, overcome it and become really courageous, viable people in the world. I think Helen Keller is a great example of this. This is a person that could have just been a vegetable, but she overcame a great deal of her disabilities. So astrology is kind of like that. And not that I'm saying astrologies are your disabilities, but it shows where your deficits are as well as your strengths. So it can just give you the tools you need to capitalize on your strengths and overcome your weaknesses. But it's not deterministic. It's not like just because your chart shows that you're an asshole means you have to be an asshole for the rest of your life. You can choose not to be an asshole. It just means you're going to have a harder time overcoming that. I mean, that's all it's going to do.
It's easy to be an asshole.
I find it hard. I find it hard just not to make that choice. Sorry.
Yeah.
But surely, I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing from April because to a large extent, I mean, if you go to a very traditional psychoanalyst, that it's a similar kind of thing, right? I mean, where and people. This is the problem with sort of pop psychology, which is why I'm really looking forward to April talking and not me, because although I've read on it, I'm not a licensed psychologist, but it is that people like the popular one at the moment is narcissism, right? Everyone in the world's getting diagnosed by their spouses as having narcissistic personality
toxicity.
But really, narcissism is a category that applies to all people, right? What's your degree of narcissism in your life? How does it interact with you? It's not, but people get the wrong end of the stick and think it's deterministic, right? That if you've got, or if you're high in trait anxiety, that means you're going to have a miserable, depressive life. No, this is a way of helping to understand the way that temperamentally you respond to stimuli in a way that helps to guide your response to be a better one. It's not deterministic. It doesn't say you're always going to be anxious.
That's the sin. That's the sin. So when you use tarot cards and you say, this is going to happen and there's no way out, that's sinful because you're depriving, you're not just depriving yourself of free will, but you're depriving God of the freedom to act in your life.
And you're giving into fear.
And you are giving into fear because most of the time when people say stuff like that, it is a fearful response. It's not usually a positive one. And so that's the sin of divination. That's the sin of using occult tools like astrology, is when you make it deterministic. As long as you are using it as a means to enlighten yourself about what you have to work with, and then that expands the choices you have available to you. That expands the range in which God could reach you. Then that becomes a holy thing, doesn't it?
That's why you need to have spiritual maturity and discernment before you mess with any of this stuff.
So I'm against fortune telling. I do think fortune telling is sinful. I do, because fortune telling is almost always portrayed in a deterministic way. And that's the only sin of the reason it's even listed, divination, as a forbidden activity in scriptures, because of its deterministic nature, that people will take a reading and lock themselves into it as if there's no alternatives now, when it's supposed to do the opposite. It's supposed to open you up to all the possibilities available to you. How are you going to work with this information now that you know this? And honestly, if you really are having an honest relationship with something like the tarot or astrology, what you should be doing with it is it should be very little more than a catalyst for inspiration and imaginative exploration. Where you're just using this tool to say, oh, wow, I didn't think of these possibilities. I didn't think of these alternatives. Because what it does is it makes you think, well, what is it trying to tell me? And so you're linking the archetypes up to what you know about your life. And what that does is it unlocks things that might be subconsciously blocked to you. That's the real value and power and usefulness of things like divination. But when you're reducing it down to being like, am I going to die on this plane trip? Or, I mean, when you reduce it down to something like that, practically a circus act, that does become somewhat sinful, because now you're missing the entire point, and you're depriving yourself of your free will. You're depriving your God of his ability to act in your life. And that's not what it's there to do. That's why but that's why it's prohibited in Scripture. It's not because it in itself is evil. It's how it's being used as a device to deprive you of your free will, which is always the ultimate sin. Everything in Scripture comes back to when freedom is deprived, that's when the sin begins. When you become a slave to your inner instincts, a slave to your animal nature, that's when the sin starts to happen. It's not so much the behavior itself as much as it's the fact that you've given away something that is more sacred than anything in the world to God, and that's your freedom. People tend to not act volitionally when they are under the duress of their lower nature. And that's the whole point of understanding how the fall has affected us, and theologically as well as spiritually. So, that was an interesting. I didn't realize that when I saw that question today, that it was going to be given on the show. I was like, boy, that's going to be a quick one to answer. Turned out to be the longest one.
Can we squeeze in another one real quick?
Yeah.
Name in the chat.
We sure can. We have a few minutes.
From Calico Benji.
Okay.
Does esoteric mean occult? Is it the same?
No. I mean, there's a relationship there, but no, they're not the same thing. Esoteric is that which is, it kind of technically means hidden in the literal sense.
Right.
But what it means is that, look, the Bible is riddled with esotericism. It's actually riddled with occult things too. But occultism is the attempt to unveil hidden things. Esotericism is the acknowledgement and realization that there are things that are hidden. Okay? And so the problem with the occult is that certain things are meant to stay hidden. They're not supposed to be uncovered. Right. They were designed in the way that they are to not be overt realities because they are so dangerous. Okay? There is a certain, it's kind of like, I don't know, removing the seatbelts on your car. You're removing the safety device that's built into the vehicle itself. It was designed to have that safety feature to protect you. If you take them out, you're depriving the vehicle of its ability to protect you. So when you use the occult, it's kind of like cutting your seatbelts out. Now, a skilled stunt driver might know how to operate a vehicle safely without harnesses or whatever, but he's trained. So occultism only becomes safe when there is skill and training involved, whereas esotericism is understanding that there are hidden meanings. I think the best way is Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff put it the best. He's a wonderful esoteric Christian, or was involved in esoteric Christianity. Gurdjieff once said that most people live their lives as though they're basically walking asleep. And he said the way to best visualize this is that it's like living in a house that has 4 stories, but you only ever stay on the first one, and you don't even know that there's a second, third, and fourth floor. Yeah. So you never even go up there. You just always stay on the first floor. Most people are like that. The second, third, and fourth floors are the different layers of esoteric reality.
It's because you get comfortable where you're at. You don't want to go anywhere else.
Exactly. So they're not the same thing, but there's a relationship. It's just the relationship is in how you're approaching it. Esotericism is just realizing that there's more to the story than what meets the eye. The Eucharist is a good example of esoteric reality, okay? Because the Eucharist in itself is hidden, right? The body of Christ is hidden under the appearance of bread and wine. It doesn't look like flesh and blood when you consume it. It doesn't taste like a piece of skin or something when you eat it. It still tastes like bread. And that's because esoterically, its reality is not immediately apparent to those who are not initiated into knowing what they are actually receiving. That's an esoteric truth it's very much a part of traditional, conventional Catholic theology and Orthodox as well. Okay. But, an occult reality would be taking the Eucharist and using it because it's a piece of power that you can maybe try to steal some of the power from it and use it for something that you want for yourself. That would be like how the occult works. Okay. So that's the difference. And I hope that was a good example. I hope that makes sense. What do you think, Jamie? Is that I mean, I don't know. Who was it that answered that?
You hit the nail on the head. I forgot who asked it.
Okay. All right. So
I think just going back to what you said about the Eucharist, that's why like a lot of very, very pious Catholics get that wrong too, because if they're looking for DNA in the Eucharist, if they're wanting to experience flesh and blood being present in the Eucharist, that is not transubstantiation.
Right.
That's transactualization.
Yes.
And so so actually, if they're finding DNA in the chalice, that's not Catholic theology.
No, I mean, unless it's a Eucharistic miracle or something, but that's a whole other matter together.
Yeah.
That's a different type of thing that happens.
Yeah, to seek for that in the Eucharist would be a wrong thing to seek.
I mean, it would be very wrong for you to take it and be like, well, that didn't taste like blood, so this must be all a bunch of crap. This isn't true.
Oh, Lord.
I mean, it's like, that's how, but there are people that do that. They're like, that's how they see it. Well, before we get to our break and get into tonight's topic with our special new guest, I want to just mention that I did write a new song this past week that was, again, one of these spiritual inspirations that I get. I don't typically write like a normal person. I'm not a musician. For those of you who don't know, I'm not a musician. I've never been trained in any instrument of any kind. I've always wanted to be, but I, as a child, would not have wanted to stay focused and deprive myself of all the fun I could have in the woods by staying inside all day and playing an instrument. So I never wanted to do it, and I never did do it, and I kind of regretted that all my life. But God seems to be able to convey to me certain realizations or visions, I guess you could call them, in the form of I'm sorry, is that your phone that's going off?
Yeah, I apologize, guys.
Okay.
For some reason, I'm getting a bunch of...
that's what that is, just her phone. God seems to convey to me certain spiritual realities from time to time, and they seem to come to me sometimes in the form of music. And so when this happens, I can suddenly start playing quite well, and I can connect with the music, and then I can write it. I can write a piece that sort of conveys the message that was conveyed to me spiritually. And so I did this once before on this show. I played Guiding My Way, which is the last song that I wrote, and I was on last season. I played it. So we have a new one tonight that I call Echoes Beyond the Veil. It is. Okay. That's what I call it. And
That's
because
a good
it's
title.
Thank you. I try to write a title that sort of captures the essence of the experience, because this is an experiential exercise for me. It's a spiritual one, but it's very experiential. Like I said, I'm not a master pianist. I'm not this wonderfully trained musician. I'm literally just, as I said before, a guy with music in his head, and I use the piano to get it out from time to time. And sometimes when it comes out, there's a message there, and this is one of them. So I'm going to leave you for this break with my new song, Echoes Beyond the Veil. And when we come back after this break, we will have April with us to discuss religious trauma. You don't want to miss it. We'll be back after this.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone, to Vestiges After Dark. We're getting ready now for the second segment and the meat of tonight's show, religious trauma, with our brand new guest, April Norrod. I think you're going to find this to be a fascinating conversation. I'm also going to open the lines because of the nature of this topic. Typically, I wait till the third segment, but I think tonight I'm going to open it from the beginning. That way, if anybody would like to call in and talk about their experiences with active religious trauma and see if we can maybe help them in some way, I'd be more than happy to. I'm sure our guest will as well. Really, a very important topic, very serious topic, and we're going to cover it all tonight. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you, everybody, for waiting through the break. Like I said, this is going to be such an important topic that really nobody should miss it. I really think it's going to be life-changing for some of you if you let it into your life. And we've got a perfect guest tonight to discuss just that. Our guest tonight is April Norrod. She's an esteemed licensed professional counselor with an authorization to practice in Tennessee, holding additional credentials as a mental health service provider and approved supervisor. Her career spans over a decade in professional counseling, underpinned by a rich educational background with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in educational psychology and counselor education. Beyond her counseling tenure, April brings a wealth of experience from over 2 decades of service in various social service roles. Her journey has seen her contribute significantly to the Department of Children's Services, adult mobile crisis, adult probation and parole, and adult alcohol and drug IOP treatment, showcasing her versatile expertise across the spectrum of mental health and social support. April's specialization in trauma and anxiety treatment is supported by her proficiency in several therapeutic modalities, including cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing, among others. Her practice extends to children, teens, and adults, including veterans, demonstrating her commitment to aiding victims of trauma through their healing journey. Her holistic approach and dedication to mental health make her a pivotal figure to the exploration of psychological impacts, particularly in the nuanced area of religious trauma. April's depth of knowledge and empathic insight promise to offer a transformative experience for all who engage with her. Let us give a warm welcome to April for being on the show. How are you doing tonight?
Welcome, April.
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing today?
We are
great.
fantastic. It's great to have you here. I remember you called in to the show a few shows ago, so maybe some of our audience remembers that. But now you're on, and I want to just make sure everyone knows, April is a member of the church. She's a student. She's part of my webinar series. She's going to be back later in the season to talk about the other side, the paranormal side. But right now we're going to talk psychology and how, the deficits of religion have interfered with people's well-being. And that's certainly true. And we're going to kind of break that down tonight. So April, I guess let's talk about it. What got you interested in this particular area of trauma research?
I think that it's just through the course of my career, I've been working with all sorts of individuals who have suffered from various types of trauma. And, I look at things from a holistic perspective. You have you have your family life, you have your church life, you have your work life, you have your friends, all those kinds of things. And I think that the religious aspect or the spiritual aspect is just as important to healing as any of the other parts of it. And, it really bothers me when people come in and one of the first questions they'll say to me, or first things they'll say to me is, I'll ask them, what's your spiritual beliefs? And they'll say, it's not Christian and I don't want to talk anything about it. And it's like, well, can you tell me why? And it's like, because I've been hurt by the church. And, that type of hurt goes in many different directions, including, some pretty significant trauma that, it's as we talk about the things tonight, it's going to, I actually had kind of a disclaimer I wanted to say. There's going to be some pretty sensitive stuff that I feel like I need to bring up to kind of explain what trauma I'm talking about. And then kind of, when I talked to Brandon about setting up this discussion, his perspective was of, they teach you to worship a God who is going to punish you and send you to hell. And that's a type of religious trauma, which right. He's correct. That is a religious trauma. Of course, my perspective was more about how people will take Bible verses or religion and use that as a way to control or manipulate or abuse someone.
Weaponize, yep.
It has been weaponized. I think we see that all the time.
Yep.
And that is the worst, I would say the most gross misuse of it. And it doesn't even have to come from the church. It can just come from somebody who is this self-proclaimed preacher on the street. I've witnessed it my whole life too. I've got very thick skin, and you kind of have to get into ministry. It's not a career choice for the faint of heart, let us say. So it rolls off my back perhaps more easily than others. But I can honestly say that growing up for a part of the time in Catholic schools, I went to public school initially. My parents were not happy with the way that those public schools operated and some of the problems that
back then, boy, I don't see them now.
Yeah, I know, right? We didn't know how good it could be. It's so much worse today. But they thought putting me in the private schools would be better. And where I grew up, the private schools were Catholic. Okay, it was a Catholic environment, and my family was Catholic. Mostly French on my father's side, mostly Italian on my mother's side. Both very Catholic, cultures, you could say. And my grandparents were all relatively religious. Some were more practicing than others, but they were still very much Christians. If you asked them, they would give you a Catholic answer about everything regarding God. But I can tell you from being in Catholic schools from 6th grade all the way through 9th grade, it was basically just one giant trauma. It was pure misery. It was pure misery from the priests to the nuns, to the brothers, to the students, to the families of the students. And I used to see, that was interesting, we did not go to church when I was growing up. My family, again, they would have given you a Catholic, both of my parents would have given you a Catholic answer to questions about God, but they never went to church. They never really saw much value in it, probably because of religious trauma. But anyway, I would go to school and I'd see the kids who were very religious, like at Mass for every Sunday, at Mass for every holy day of obligation, went to confession several times a year, and they were truly the worst families in the school. And you have to ask yourself, why is this? And we're going to talk about why this is. I have the answer to that. But at the time, I just wanted to get the hell out of there as quickly as I could. And so I never had a good impression of the church growing up for this reason. It just didn't affect me as much because I could come home to parents that agreed with it. Look, we're just sending you to this school because it's a better education and it's safer. You don't, just take the religious stuff, let it, with a grain of salt. You don't have to participate in that any more than they require. So I had a safe space at home I could come back to. I didn't have to deal with it. Some families don't have that. But I'll tell you, it was awful. It was awful. And this is the Catholic church, I'm sure a lot of the ones you see, April, are coming from a lot of the Protestant churches in Tennessee, as well as, I mean, imagine there's Catholics there too. But what would you say is sort of the demographic that you see? Is it mostly Protestants, mostly Catholic, and are they different when you encounter each one as far as the trauma or the types of trauma that they report to you?
Well, in the community that I live in, there's only one Catholic church, and that's kind of primary, and it covers probably several counties.
Okay.
So most of the clients that I see would be from a Protestant background, I would say. Honestly, I can't think of maybe one person I've ever had that had a Catholic background, and they were of a different race. Mm-hmm. So they were Hispanic in origin, and there's more Hispanic Catholics than there are the Protestant, I believe.
To be, yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, you're totally right. I mean, it's like,
go ahead.
The people who, of course, I work with men and women, but it's typically, I have a higher percentage of females that I work with. And when you look at statistics of trauma, women, I just talked to somebody today just to verify my statistics, but 1 in 3 women have been a victim of some kind of sexual assault. And that's up from what I used to know. I used to think it was 1 in 4, and that's all that's reported.
In general, or in the church? In general?
In general. Just in general,
okay.
Right. And so, and I'm going to relate that back to the church in that a lot of these people that I work with have been sexually assaulted by a family member, and then they go to church and they get sexually assaulted by a pastor or some other church leader.
Yeah.
And then, I even had one lady that told me she had been sexually assaulted by a family member and by a church member, and then she was acting out, which is totally normal for kids. They don't know how to express in words what's happened to them, so they acted out.
Right.
And she was acting out, and so the church said, she's possessed by demons.
Oh, Lord.
You got to get these demons out of her.
Yeah.
And then they would tell the other kids, don't play with her because she's possessed by demons. And so this particular person actually she's the one that said to me, I'm not Christian. I don't even want to talk anything about it. In fact, I'm satanic now. I worship Satan. So I'm like, that's a complete opposite. So that just shows how strong that trauma was that she went through. And anybody that I talk to that has a religious trauma, or any kind of trauma for that matter, but religious trauma specifically, I think it impacts them that strongly.
Yeah.
There's I don't want to go to church because they're all hypocrites.
And why would you? Why? I mean, nobody wants to be around that. We shun things that make us uncomfortable, and church is supposed to be a family environment. Not to mention that people today tend to have very toxic family relationships. So that's not even an archetype you can really relate to the church. It's supposed to be, but it becomes something else. I have found as a pastor, what I have witnessed over the years in pastoral ministry, both as the leader of a church and also as somebody that was part of the church on the very, when I was a seminarian, very low down on the totem pole. I can say that it seems to attract a large number of people who use it as a means of some type of social justification for control. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that go into the church because they see it as a way to assume some kind of control.
Authority.
It starts with, I'm more pious than you are because I'm here all the time. And the pastor
do you think
knows.
It also attracts people who are so B grade that in any other environment, there's no way they'd get on or be able to be, senior or promoted or in charge of something.
I do.
So they join the church because there's less competition, and they're a softer mark. And because, unlike Bishop Brian, I grew up with no church whatsoever. So I'm typically English in that regard, that the church has almost no, it's just, even in the 80s had just didn't have any pull. Like, no one had to go to be respectable, and so my parents just didn't. And so so I didn't have any of that. My experience of church trauma was coming to faith, which was in quite a natural and beautiful way. But really, my trauma is from having been a priest, and how the trauma of that, both within the hierarchy and from colleagues, and also from parishioners, because they also psychologically abuse clergy.
I think that's a good point, because I think we need to make very clear on that before you continue on, fathers. I want to make very clear for the audience. Understand that religious trauma works in both directions. Okay, the clergy are just as much a victim of it as you are as a part of the congregation. There is a toxicity in this that is not Christian in any shape or form, no matter how you look at it. It's not a Christian characteristic. It is part of the darkness.
The heart of it.
It is control.
It's not Christian.
It's not Christian. Yeah. And I think that the reason that churches are the perfect target is because that's where this particular kind of darkness can do the most harm. And I'm not talking about the devil, okay? I'm not talking about Satan. I'm talking about human nature here, all right? Which is why church tends to get this reputation for being the place where the pedophiles hang out. Okay, because it's nothing could be further from the truth. It's like less than 1 or 2% of clergy are actual pedophiles or child abusers. Most of the larger numbers are in schools or clubs that deal with children, daycare centers, that type of thing.
Scouts.
Government agencies.
The reality, and families. Let's not forget that families are the number one. Okay, of child molestation, 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a family member, someone that knows you. Okay, if you've been abused. The reason, though, that churches get targeted is because of the opportunity. There's trust there, and it's easy to gain access to children and use that as under this malicious intent, which of course has nothing at all to do with the whole purpose of why we are supposed to be going there. So I do think, Father Chris, you are absolutely right. I think it does attract marginal people who see this as an opportunity for them to have some claim to power within the world because they are failures in every other respect. I have seen this over and over again. The control that I saw all throughout my career with parishioners vying for attention or power was the whole story. And yes, very traumatic for me.
Relationships.
Yeah. So that's part of it. But I'm sorry, I didn't want to derail you, April, but I think that's an important distinction to make for people to understand that. I think sometimes it's like us wicked clergy are just out to kind of control people. No, we're being attacked the same way. There's a malicious thing there. Yeah.
And so the question at the end of my point was really, look, a church, yes, absolutely should be a physically safe place to be. No question. But it shouldn't necessarily be an intellectually safe place to be, right? And that's the sort of rub. Because if we are being faithful to the gospel, then there's demands made of us by God, which are really hard for all of us, right? Now, obviously, a psychologically healthy person is coaching along the lines of, look, this is God's gold standard. We're all struggling along with it. We should help each other out. Mm-hmm. But, where do you think, April, the tipping point is between, in a sense, legitimate, challenge to be the very best that God wants you to be, which is, that's the purpose of somebody in the church, somebody like me. Where's the tipping point between that and control and abuse?
I think that's a good question. I think, and to kind of back up a little bit, what y'all are saying about as far the people who are leaders in the church are put on a high pedestal, and there's expectations of you from that perspective. This is your preacher, this is your, deacon, whatever, and these are fine, upstanding citizens. And if you do make a mistake, I think that it hits you guys harder from that perspective. And I think that, and then I have worked with some wives of preachers who talk about the stress that they're under because they're expected to be, they're a preacher's wife, so they have to act a certain way.
Oh yeah.
And the same thing with the kids. The kids have to act a certain way too because they're preacher's kids. And it's the old thing where they say, well, when they're a preacher kid, when they get out on their own, they're going to go hog wild. Well, there's some truth to that.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
Yeah, they do because they are held kind of under this microscope. You got to behave a certain way, and that's a hard pressure. So as far as when the tipping point is, I really think that it has to do I think that a lot of people who are perpetrators, now this is not 100%, but I feel like a higher percentage of them have been victims themselves. And they're trying to regain some kind of control because they haven't had it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, again, that's not everybody. And I think that gives them a source of power. And the victim who sees the church member who's a leader, an elder in the church, or even, this is somebody you can trust, you can hang out with them, you have the Bible studies and the church camps and all these different things. And it's just, as far as that tipping point, I think it comes down to just kind of that control. They want to have some kind of control and regain something that they like. I think it has to do with boundaries too.
Well, let's face it. Let's face it. The church, and I think part of the issue from the other side of the coin, okay, is that churches are not, nor have they ever been, places for healthy people. I mean, by nature of what they are there for the spiritually ill. They are there to help the spiritually ill get better. And so maybe there's a part of some of these abusers that find their way into the church, these marginal people that find their way into the church and use it for this malicious purpose. Maybe part of that is, in some weird, twisted way, something in their psyche recognizing that I need the healing that's here, but they're just not going about acquiring it in any kind of healthy, proactive way. And that might be why so many sick people end up in the church and why it attracts a lot of, dare I say, crazy people, because it does. I mean, I'll be honest.
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I must be crazy. I mean, you talk about control.
Yeah.
I mean, I work for the institution as much as being a priest. And so that, you're told where you live. You're given a schedule that's not under your control. If you're a celibate priest, then you don't have anyone at home. You might live with another priest, but you don't have anyone with that intimate relationship that can kind of check you, or right, bounce things off you. And even if you are married, like you say, your spouse gets dragged into a whole nightmare of a. So, I mean, in terms of power and control, one of my theories about sexually abusive clergy is it's almost they're so powerless and controlled that they need an outlet for power and control, and that's why they find somebody less powerful than them, and that's a child, right? And so and that's why I think certainly, like Roman Catholic priest friends of mine here, there's been a sea change in how they are treated, for the better, might I add. There's far more sense of autonomy, even though they have to go to certain parishes and do certain roles, but there's far more a sense of personal freedom to, outside of those, required duties to explore themselves in a far more empowering way. I think that's been one of the good things that's come out of this horror of the revelation of abuse, from within the church,
which was a lot worse in the 40s and 50s than it is now.
Yeah,
I mean, it was much more of a prolific problem back then than it is now.
And there was far more deference to bishops back then.
Yes,
it's far more acceptable for priests to say, "I think you're wrong, bishop."
Mm-hmm.
Or what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, partly because there's so few priests, we go, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Seriously, I need some time off. See ya.
Yeah.
But what do you think about that issue of sort of feeling personally constrained by?
I think it is because it's been proven. There's practically the same incidence of child molestation and child sexual abuse amongst Catholic clergy as it is in Protestant churches, as it is in Jewish synagogues, and Jewish rabbis get married. Most Protestant pastors get married. Celibacy is kind of unique only to Catholicism in that respect. Unless you talk about like Orthodox bishops. Orthodox bishops are typically drawn from the monasteries, and they are compelled to be celibate. But for the most part, most clergy are married, and the incidence rates are the same. So you can't say it's like some kind of sexual deprivation. That if they were to...
Oh, no, because even though there's been a problem, it's still below the average, right? It's below the median outside of everybody.
It is.
Obviously it's news when the church does it, but like I say, April, I'm kind of I'm being far too self-interested in this, but I just know how traumatic it is to be in that sort of meat in the sandwich between the weight of an institution on your back and the weight of responsibility for a group of people who look to you for guidance and healing. And I don't think clergy should be on a pedestal. I think one of the reasons that I'm temperamentally Catholic, even though I was catechized, I was evangelized by the Baptists, right, in England. But I think the reason I ended up in that camp, part of the appeal was that the priesthood was not about how worthy a person was. It was literally a sacramental reality, and therefore, the primary function of a priest is to celebrate mass and hear confessions. And so it matters less really how good you are. Whereas in Protestantism, it's much more important how virtuous the leader is, because that's almost the source of their authority. There's a real irony to it because they reject works as a means of salvation, but when it comes to their ministers, everything's about their work. So, I mean, have you spent much time with pastors who are in that situation and feeling sort of trapped, or you feel like they're damned if they do and damned if they don't?
I mean, I have worked with a few pastors and I couldn't tell you what denomination it was at this point, but there's a lot of pressure on them you guys are a leader in the church. So in any organization, if you hold a leadership role, you've constantly got that pressure from the organization to do all these things. And then you got these people down here that you're trying to share that information with, and to not overwhelm these down here, because the ones that's underneath are complaining about, well, why are we doing it this way? I don't like this, that kind of thing. So I think that just being in that middle has got to be a lot of pressure. And, one minister that I was working with was in the process of going through a divorce. And, the divorce, it wasn't because of the biblical reasons. It was because of some kind of, I think it was what's it called?
Irreconcilable differences. Irreconcilable differences.
So they were dealing with that, and so they had to go to the church and announce that to the church, and that was such a thing of embarrassment for them to have to say that.
Yeah,
because of that judgment that's placed on them. Well, you're a preacher. How can you have this? Why would you?
Because they're human.
I went through that, and my option was to lose my job and my house, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
See, my option is to be the way.
Right?
My option is to be the way that I am. Okay, so a lot of people I rub the wrong way, because if somebody pisses me off, I'll tell them to go fuck off, and I'll say it just like that. And you're like, but wait a second, you're a bishop. You can't do that. Oh, yes, I can. Yes, I can.
It's much healthier,
because I'm not trying to be anything other than a human being. I have an office to run. We all do. The Christian office is the same for all of us, different capacities within it, and I have a different capacity than everyone else as a bishop. But that does not change the fact that I am still a man. I'm still a human being, and I don't pretend to be anything less than that or anything more than that. It's just
and putting people on pedestals is evil.
It is.
I mean, Thomas Jefferson can't remain on a pedestal. They're tearing him down off pedestals all over America. If he can't stay on a pedestal, I've got no chance.
Jesus said, "Why call me good?" Right? He said, "Why call me good?" That's Jesus. I mean, there's nobody good but your heavenly Father. I mean, there's a reason he tells us this. Because that is, again, he's leading by example. He's showing us how to approach the Christian life. And so, yes, I mean, clergy...
I always engaged in ministry in that way as well. I was always very much the ex-policeman who swore.
It's the best way to be.
Because I didn't grow up with that sense of piety. I wasn't around religious people, and so all I knew that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And that's the heart of my faith.
Well, that should be the heart of everyone's faith. That should be what we're all looking at, you know.
So that's the thing that really matters. And then the things that matter on the edge of that are, and related to that are, you know, you read theology and you deepen your understanding of the church and the sacraments and all the rest of it. And it flows from there. But it does not flow from, I'm a really good person, you know. I mean, yeah, we want to be people that are seeking to imitate Christ, but you know, a leader in any group of Christians is not the one that's imitating Christ the best. You know, like that's not how it works. We're not in, you know, we're in competition only with our own selves and our own seeking of salvation, not with one another. You know, it's
which I guess gets me to
now is so awful and unpleasant and in my experience has led as empty churches out. You know,
and that's what I want to.
What's emptying churches out is not necessarily the clergy. Several people in the chat have mentioned what I've been thinking the whole time. And April, I'm sure you can back us up. It's not necessarily the clergy and minister of the pastor. It's the congregants. It's the church community that are so judgmental and look down upon people. And you have people who may look different, come from different backgrounds, may love differently, and they're going to the church for validation and for love, and they get rejected because they don't fit their little paradigm, their little checkbox. So it's not even the clergy that I think most of the trauma comes from. I know I left the church twice because of the shitty way the people treated me and people I cared about. So I think that's what we need to concentrate on. And I think April can back that up. Most people leave the church and have trauma from the church, not from the clergy, but from the damn people that go there.
That's what I wanted to ask you, April, next here is, what have you seen? If you could give us a list, perhaps, an outline of the primary types of trauma that you're encountering regularly from the people that have come to you and report that this is what's going on.
I would have to say anything and everything.
So it's a very diversified problem.
It really is, because when you talk about trauma, you have the emotional trauma, which, Father Chris kind of alluded to that about where, the narcissistic, those kinds of people. And, I want to come back to that. So don't let me forget it. I want to come back to the label part of it. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest issues that I think people who are victims of trauma suffer from is these unrealistic expectations or this beliefs that get put on them.
Right.
You have to, like, here's an example. The parent tells the kid, you need to make passing grades. Okay. The kid makes B's. That's not good enough. You need to make A's. The kid makes A's. Well, that's still not good enough. You need to make A+. So it's like there's this moving target. And I think that causes any kid to get this sense of, well, I can't do anything right. Mm-hmm. So therefore I'm unworthy. And the unworthy relates to, that's taught in church. You're not worthy of this, that, or the other. And I think that that's a big problem, is trying to retrain the brain to recognize that even if you're not perfect, you still have worth and value. And I think people have a really hard time wanting to do that black and white thinking of, I'm either good or I'm bad. Well, sometimes we're both. And I think that's
we are both.
We're always both.
Always both.
Right.
Until heaven, we're always both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people struggle with that because they feel like, well, I have to be perfect. I can't make a mistake. If I make a mistake, and this is where trauma comes in too, because the hypervigilant, where they're always kind of watching over their shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, is because for them, something bad has always happened and they never know what to expect. Mm-hmm. So they're just constantly in this state of, well, I can't move forward because I'm trying to survive the day. So to go back to your question, Bishop Brian, I think that as far as the trauma, I would say emotional trauma is probably the worst.
Oh, yeah.
And that comes from everybody, or not everybody, I should take that back. Comes from most abusers in some shape, form, or fashion, because you got the physical abuse, right? Those are bruises and cuts and things like that will eventually heal. Mm-hmm. Sexual trauma is bad. I mean, that's one of the worst ones, but most people who have been through some kind of sexual trauma will tell me that the emotional stuff is worse. Mm-hmm. I think it's just the words is what hurts the most. Mm-hmm. And as we're trying to help people, we got to find out internally, what is those core beliefs they're telling themselves? What are they, Are they telling themselves they're worthy? Are they telling themselves that the world is not safe? Well, how do we help them realize that only in certain circumstances is that true?
It's
So I don't know if that answered your question.
it does, and it definitely illustrates how pervasive of an issue this is, because I mean, let's look at some of the consequences of it now. You know, one of the things that drives me absolutely insane is when I hear people say, "I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." And then when you get into it, it's like initially it's a trigger, because it's like, this is not an excuse, okay, from a Christian standpoint, okay. Religious trauma does not excuse you from your Christian obligation. In fact, it's a call to action. It actually should do the opposite. Rather than drive you away, it should actually drive you further in and to take up the reins and actually do something about that. So I have always tried to encourage people when they tell me something like that, well, why do you say that? You know, I want to know, like, why do you say that? And because most people have had some, at least at my age or older, have had some background in the church, and have left it for the various reasons. And then, you know, when you ask them about it and you really get into it, you find that it comes back to religious trauma. It does. And they just got out because they didn't want to experience that trauma anymore. It wasn't worth it to them. But then I try to sit, if they give me the opportunity to sit down and talk with them to really get back into it, we come back to the realization of the gospel itself and what it means to fulfill that obligation. And I think a lot of Christians forget that Jesus was crucified because of his own people. It wasn't the Romans did it at the instruction of his own people. Pontius Pilate did not want to crucify him.
He tried to get out of it.
He tried to get out of it multiple times. And it was the pious of Jesus' time that did it to him. The most pious, apparently, the ones that were supposed to be the most godly, were the ones that actually were the ones responsible for it. And I think that doesn't change for the Christian. It's always a call to action. It's a warning that the wolves in sheep's clothing are going to be those closest to you. It's going to be the ones that you think are the safest. Those are the ones you have to be the most concerned about. But it doesn't.
But I think that's why it damages people so much.
Yes, because it's a trust violation. Yeah,
but it's a double violation, because it's the people who are closest to you within an organization, which is supposed to have the best of intentions. Like when I got betrayed in the police, so what? Mm-hmm. You know, you're in the police, right? So people are assholes. Yeah. Policemen are professionally trained to deal with it. And so if someone stabs you in the back, you think, well, yeah. So, that's what, I remember I listened to, I can't remember his name. He's an American ex-Marine, ex-police officer that wrote the book on hypervigilance, right? And he came out to Australia to give talks on it. I can't remember his name. I wish I could. You might know. And he was brilliant, and a fair play to the New South Wales Police. I was a chaplain to them. They invited him, and anyone could go and listen to him, get a copy of his book. And at halftime, I was so pleased with myself. Went over to him and said, I was a policeman for 10 years, and I understand where you're coming from, but now I'm a priest. And he said, you lot are worse. And he said, one of my really good friends who used to deliver this course, he was a friend of mine and a colleague, and I trained him in this, and he did psychology qualification. He left when he retired from the police, became a Methodist minister, and within 6 months he was divorced and homeless. And so, it's even worse because of the expectation of where you are. But I also wondered, you probably don't get too much of this in Tennessee, although this is me just projecting what I think Tennessee is like. I've not been there. But one of my friends lived there for a while, didn't you, Jamie? The godless religions, that is to say, the climate cultists and I don't mean the politics of climate change. I mean the people the ones who are setting themselves on fire, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What are the common traits? Like, where do you see the abuse within those systems? You know, the sorts of the radicalized students and the overwhelmingly college-educated white women that are just being sucked into this sort of what I see as a religious ideology, except it's a godless one. What do you think are the common traits of abuse in those amongst those groups?
Are you asking like specific denominations, or are you asking just traits?
I guess I'm asking the kind of psychological question. You know, what are the psychological demons, for lack of a better word, at play in that are common to both, you know, the godless religions that people, you know, that captivate people and become cultic within themselves. You know, I guess, you know, in that sense, the difference between somebody, you know, that's concerned about the environment, which is a legitimate thing to be, as opposed to somebody who is, scorched earth approach. We've got to kill all the power and get completely, you know, it takes over their whole life. That every part of their life is devoted to this one particular thing. You know, because that strikes me as psychologically unhealthy. Whether you're doing that in the name of the church or in the name of, you know, climate change or any or Donald Trump, or, you know, I'm not picking political sides, but what do you think are the common psychological vulnerabilities that lead people down that path, and how are they abused by people?
I think that the people who, so that's kind of a big question, right? Because I think that, for lack of a better way to describe it, I think that people start out young in some kind of toxic, abusive kind of environment. And then I think that they start to see that as normal. And so when they go out and they make, you know, friendships, relationships, whatever, whether that's romantic or, you know, platonic or a church or whatever, they look for the things, the traits, the mannerisms, the behaviors, the way that people talk to them that is familiar to them. Because I hear it time and time again, people will say, why does it always happen to me? And I think it's because they don't recognize, or they don't realize it goes back to, they don't realize their worth again. And I think that they don't think they deserve any better, and that they're there to be, you know, somebody else's
they don't know how to be different.
Yeah. And it takes a long time, I think, for someone to realize that that's not normal, because a lot of people will tell me, I didn't realize that wasn't normal.
Right.
And for the rest of them, might be like, what? How can you not see that as abnormal? But they don't. I was actually, even myself as a young counselor, one of the things that I struggled with was, why does women stay in domestic violence relationships?
Oh, as a cop, let me tell you, girl.
I could not figure it out.
Yeah.
And then I read this book, and it talked about the reason they stay is because they're focusing on how do you survive today instead of focusing on the doorknob of how to get out.
Right.
And when that clicked for me, it's like, oh, it makes a whole lot of sense. So I think, going back to the traits, their traits are such that they learn from an early age, you have to survive. So kind of that animalistic, even feral kind of child, they have to survive. They may be having to go through the trash to get food, or they're eating butter, or they're eating dog food because they don't have food. And so they don't know any better. So they just kind of, they don't realize that they're worth more, that there's better things out there, because they've never been around it. And there's some theories that say that a person's emotional development stops at the age of their first trauma. So if you think about that,
that's interesting.
I can get on board with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you have like a 3-year-old who gets traumatized at age 3, well, then they stay at age 3. So you may have an adult who's 25 years old throwing a 3-year-old temper tantrum.
Oh, I've seen it.
Yeah, I have too. And April's theory is that once they get into a safe environment, then their emotional development starts getting better again. But part of that includes they have to get counseling. They have to have supportive people, which would include a church, or, you know, people that they can, you know, friends they can lean on and stuff like that.
So how do you help them overcome, like, religious trauma from your side of it, from the psychological vantage point? Because, I mean, Father Chris and I have answers from the spiritual, religious side, but how do you do it? from the therapy side?
Well, what I do is I say, like, for example, people will say, somebody just told me this the other day. My husband is upset with me because I don't want to have sex with him. And he says, in the Bible, it tells me I'm supposed to.
Oh, God.
And so,
Yeah.
and so my response to that is, okay, it does say that, but read the next verse. What does the next verse say? And I actually looked this up. I think it's in Corinthians or something like that. It says your wife's duty to the husband, but it actually says the husband has a duty to the wife. And if my understanding is correctly, duty means to honor and cherish, not to serve them or whatever. So the one about
it's the same. It's the same with the verse about wives submit to your husbands, right?
Yes.
And they end it there, and the rest of it says, as your husband submits to God.
yes,
Right. So in other words, the husband can't demand anything of his wife that God would not.
And remember how it works. Remember how it works with God is that the higher up you go, the more you serve. So it actually is more of a subordinate position in that sense. And that's the part of the context that's being lost by this taking quotes of the Bible out of context, which it's not just things like this. It's everything. It's every single
but that's why
verse.
Protestants are more vulnerable to that.
Yes.
You see, Protestant churches are way more vulnerable. Now, of course, there's been awful abuse in the Catholic churches. I'm not, not making any other statement other than that, but
yeah.
I think within Protestant churches, I guess the difference is that a Catholic priest could not build a church congregation based on a really flawed reading of the scriptures, because ultimately there is a doctrine behind that's bigger than him and bigger than his church, than his local church. So, whereas in Protestantism, the mechanism for dealing with that is, they pretty much own their congregation, right? I mean, I've heard of people, they've passed on their congregation to their son. Like that's anathema in the Catholic or even Anglican.
It happens a lot in the Protestant church. It's family.
Yeah, so I think the sorts of power abuses are really more prevalent. I mean, probably more subtle as well in Protestant churches, because you can, in fact, a whole group of people can allow themselves to be misfocused, which you couldn't imagine that happening in the Orthodox or Catholic churches. I think it's been that's why it's been far more like sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, as opposed to, I know these things are connected, but it's not necessarily doctrinal abuse,
Well, I think actually sexual abuse has a lot of esoteric implications as well, which is why there might be some vulnerability in clerical settings and teaching as well, because they're similar in a lot of ways. I really think what it comes back to is a subconscious desire to possess one's innocence. I really do. I think it is an externalization of that sort of manifests through a guilt or a guilty relationship with one's own sexual maturity. And I think it is a type of sexual immaturity that leads to it, honestly, but it's also an immaturity that is more pervasive than just that. While it manifests sexually, okay, clearly, because there's lots of ways to abuse someone. You don't necessarily have to abuse them in that particular way. So there's obviously a sexual component. But what is it that's driving it? Is it an absolute lust for flesh? I don't think so. What I see it as, and I used to work in a clinical setting. And a lot of my clients, I shouldn't say a lot of my clients. No, I'm not going to say that. I'd say a lot of my clients were abused. But I had a handful of clients who were abusers, sexual abusers, pedophiles, I guess. I don't like that term because it's not really accurate, but for common
pederast is more accurate.
It's actually more accurate. But anyway, for understanding, yes, pedophiles. I had some clients that were, and I always try to understand, like, the one thing that confuses me the most about it is like, why this manifestation in particular? And when you get into it, they don't really know. But as you talk to them about the other aspects or other components of their behavior, you find that what it really is that they've lost something within themselves. They blame their sexual maturity on it, and they use it as a means or a vehicle to reclaim that in some kind of, or repossess that in some kind of way, even though it's an impossibility, right? I mean, even if you successfully molest a child, it doesn't mean you're going to get your innocence back, or that you're going to be able to claim it in some kind of way. But it is almost like a sad, sorry, twisted way of trying to do just that. And I think that is ultimately the foundation to how this goes about in the rest of the world. So, when I try to analyze things like any kind of, I mean, not just the sexual aspects, which is a big part of religious trauma, but the entirety of it, just simply like what Brandon's experience, right? Brandon, you've talked so much on the show, in the chat, you've talked so much about the nature of what you grew up with, this being in, this fear of hell, and this God of condemnation,
fire and brimstone,
which is not Christian. It isn't. That is not the Christian message. That is not the message of the gospel. Is there peril there? Yes, but God has only one function within it, and that is to save you from all of that, not to condemn you to it. And so I think a lot of it comes down to the unfortunate wording in the Old Testament that deals with this judgment of God, not understanding what that means. We liken it to a judge on earth that hands out punishments for crimes. And
well,
that,
in a historical sense, America suffers from the fact that Puritans went there.
yes,
but Cromwell was over, and so they get on a boat and go to the New World, and you're founded by Puritanism. And then the antidote to it is Irish Catholicism, which which is what you're describing. I mean, the Catholicism of France and Italy that your parents' heritage is a very different, I think, better Catholicism than Irish Catholicism, which I was kind of at arm's length exposed to growing up, and certainly in Australia, which has been the dominant form. Yeah. And so, America's had this sort of worst of both worlds approach to Christianity, really. And so you see it played out, I see it in your Hollywood films. But at the same time, I mean, I don't want to write off America. At the same time, you've maintained faith in God better than anywhere in Europe. So
yeah, sometimes I think for the wrong reasons, but you're not exactly wrong. Well, let's talk more about that when we come back here. We're going to take our last break here, and then when we return, we'll continue and even take your questions. The number's on the screen, and I'll give it to you again here when we come back. Don't go away. Gotta get out of here tonight. Oh, I wanna run off and fly, and I'll tell myself it's fine to be alone, just to find somewhere that finally feels like home. Oh, oh, oh. I hate all this overthinking. Oh, 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 oh. The more I swim, the more I'm sinking. Take me to a world of silver. No more heartbreaks, tears, painkillers. Take me somewhere unfamiliar. Bring me back to where we started out. Get me out of now.
and starting fights, turning truth to lies. Gotta get up, stop wasting time. Yeah, I wanna run off and fly. And I'll tell myself it's fine to be alone, just to find somewhere that finally feels like home. I hate all this overthinking. The more I swim, the more I'm sinking. Take me to a world of silver, no more heartbreaks.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark. Tonight we're talking about religious trauma with our brand new special guest, April Norrod. You can call into the show now and talk about whatever might be on your mind regarding this topic. I noticed that most of the commentary is coming in from the chat, but we much would prefer that you call and talk to us directly at 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Enter PIN number 855-4111 to get placed into the queue. That's 855-4111. And we'll take you on the air. Or you can ask a question any of the chats around the internet where we are simulcasting. Okay? More when we come back. Don't go away. See, one of the, I think, challenges here is that, and Brandon just mentioned it in the chat on YouTube, that it inevitably, this problem of religious trauma comes down to largely bad theology. And once you take, I mean, you know, we've been talking a lot about some of the obvious forms of abuse, like the literal abuse, sexual abuse, all that stuff. But that's not going to be, I think, the majority of people who leave the church. It's not because that happened to them. It has much more, I think, to do with the fact that they were taught a lie. And then they had to face that lie and decide whether or not they wanted to buy into it or not. And regardless of whether or not they chose to buy into it or just lose their faith altogether, the trauma remained the same. Many people I know went into these alternative types of religious paths like witchcraft, for example, Wicca. Wicca is populated with a bunch of people who used to be Catholic and just couldn't deal with that, with the church anymore, with the constant obsession with sin, the punishment and wrath of God, and again, even atheism is almost a kind of reactionary effect of religious trauma in the world. It might we talk about personal religious trauma, but there's also a social effect that it has had. And atheism, I think, is a big response to that. Because when you talk to atheists and you find out, well, why are you an atheist? What's your driving reason for it? It always comes back to a gross misrepresentation and misunderstanding of theology. Every single time. I've never met an atheist who actually understood theology correctly. Not one. And it's not that, it's like, it's easy for me to say, right? Because, it's like, of course a bishop's going to say that. Oh, no. I'd be the first one to say you're right. Believe me, if you were right about whatever it is that you claim, I held no paradigms with the Christian faith, okay? The Christian faith is my practice. It is not my identity. All right, Christian faith is something I have chosen a path that I've chosen to follow. It is not an identity, and it is not who I am. That's a big distinction, and that actually helps a lot with working through some of the challenges here. But outside of all of that, and it's not about me, it's really about understanding that if you believe something about the church, I can guarantee you whatever it is that drove you off, it's because you were taught something that's actually not true. And Brandon, you are like the poster child for this, unfortunately. I don't mean to highlight you here, but I mean, you really, you've talked so much about it, and you've been open and honest about it, which I applaud. It definitely takes courage to do that. And I think you found us largely through a response to that. I mean, you actually did the right thing. You did the one thing that everyone should be doing. You're like, wait a second. Can it really be this bad? I was taught all this stuff. Is it really like this? I need to find out. I need to find someone who can help me find out. And, I guess God led you to us here because we are really all about correcting a lot of the mistakes in Christianity. That's what this church was founded on. That's why we're hated so much by both sides. Hated by the conventionalists, hated by the anti-theists, I guess you could call them. And I've always said, when you're hated by everybody, that's when you know you're doing everything right.
But isn't it like Brandon, that story you've described of Brandon's? I think because there's another category of person that leaves the church. The other category of person that leaves the church are not necessarily people who are antithetical to church teaching, but in a weird way, actually take church teaching seriously, and they don't want to have to sacrifice anything.
Well, that's another side too.
So there's a whole group of people that leave the church just because it's like, oh, actually, I probably do believe it, but if I actually go any further in this, I'm really going to believe it, and I don't want to have to change my life. So I'll leave. Right now, that's why it's different in Brandon's case. Because Brandon's the opposite of that, because he's from a church that's given him really crappy teaching. Now, that's not unique, by the way. I mean, the shadow side of Catholicism and sometimes Orthodoxy is that they give no teaching. So they don't necessarily give wrong teaching, but they don't teach enough. Just colour something in at the back and be quiet. Well, that's rubbish. But in Brandon's case, there's a desire to actually want to love and serve God and make a sacrifice for that. So rather than just going, none of this stacks up and it's abusive, I'm just going to leave, he's gone, no, I'm actually in pursuit of the truth. That's the way of the pilgrim. And so I'm speaking for you, Brandon, but does that ring true with you?
I would say in a lot of ways, that's kind of what led me on the path, because I remember thinking, like, is this really it? Because like I posted in the chat, as a kid, the worst things you're thinking of is like school, getting good grades, or in whatever activity you do, soccer or basketball or whatever. But I remember there were several nights when I was a child telling myself, I got to pray for forgiveness before I go to sleep, because I did not want to die in my sleep and wake up in hell because I forgot to ask for forgiveness.
See, that kind of crap right there is what makes teenagers kill themselves.
Yeah.
That shit right there. Because I've seen that happen too.
Yeah.
When a teenager's coming into their own and they realize maybe they love differently or they feel differently, and they get rejected by the church, and they still love God, but now they feel like they're not worthy, and so they just end it.
Well, think about all of the various groups. Think about those various groups. You have homosexuals that leave the church because they don't feel that there's any place for them in it. And in a lot of these churches, there isn't. A lot of these churches don't have any place for them. They condemn them. They'll condemn them openly to their face. And then you got churches that are, then you got the people that are like, for whatever reason, that they just cannot relate to it because there's been just so much negativity associated with it, as I can relate to, because I always liked the Mass for the most part. I just didn't like the people. So yeah, so it's like I would when I started making a series.
Become a Palmarian. They only have like the Eucharistic prayer.
Why do you think I looked at the Carthusians? They all have their own private altar and they just do it themselves. Yeah. I mean, it's like that was very appealing to me. When I was a seminarian and trying to figure out how to respond to this vocation from God, but not be stuck in this hell of the congregation. I would just sit in the front pew and I would just fixate. Like I'd put my blinders on, and most people would never sit up front anyway, so I didn't have to usually worry about people behind me. The most interaction I had to do was that sign of peace.
How'd that go?
Usually they were like a few pews behind, so you weren't expected to go around and shake them. You could just wave, And so it was very nice. It was very nice. I didn't have to be too interactive until I started to become.
I can't stand the sign of peace. That's why I prefer the old mass. There isn't one.
I know. Yeah, it's true. It is a little distracting at times. You have to curtail. It can get a little out of control, and then you get the people with the hand holding and all that stuff going on. But April, what about like people that find alternative religions as a response to this, or worse yet, they become a church of themselves? Like Father Chris was saying, some people do have the opposite effect. They don't lose the beliefs. They reconstitute them into something that is conducive to who they want or what they want to be. So I think a lot of evangelicals today have taken on that approach where it's like, I don't need a priest. I don't need a church. I've got the Bible. So you got that type of person, and they tend to be some of the most judgmental, by the way. Mm-hmm. So when you come across a Bible only evangelical on the internet, they're usually the ones condemning everyone else to hell. So it's like, okay, so in your response to religious trauma, you're going to now traumatize the rest of the world. That's so
because
typical.
If you spend your whole life with no access to the sacrament of reconciliation, that's what happens to you.
Yeah, there you go. So April, what do you think of that?
I mean, when they're praying to God to forgive them directly, they're really expecting a lot of their own psyche.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, April? Because rather than having a third party, in the Catholic tradition, a priest literally puts it beyond doubt and says, God has put away your sins. So it's no longer a matter of opinion. It's not subjective anymore. It's an objective reality that helps move you along.
Yeah.
If you're trying to reach this situation that Protestants believe of essentially perfect contrition, Catholics believe that too. If you're perfectly sorry, of course you are forgiven. But I mean, what psychological damage would that do to somebody to think that that's where they've got to get with everything that they may do or think wrong?
I think that is one of the biggest problems. That goes back to that whole, you have to be perfect. And then they teach, you're taught that if you sin, you're going to hell. Mm-hmm. And so you go through life trying to not sin. Like Brandon was talking about, he wants to pray to ask for forgiveness so that he doesn't die and go to hell in the middle of the night. But then also it tells you that we're all sinners. So that's one of those dual messages that we get, and it sets people up, I think, for kind of a learned helplessness and hopelessness. And I think, and it's totally about, I think that you had asked before, let me see if I can rewind back a little bit, but you had asked before about what is when people come to me with religious trauma, how do I work with them?
Yes.
Well, my first response to them is, have you read the Bible yourself? And most of them will say no. And I will tell them, I'll say, go pick one up and read it, because what you have been taught is probably not true, is not accurate. Mm-hmm. It's the whole thing of you've been taught this verse that puts you in a submissive kind of abusive kind of situation.
Yeah, they cherry pick.
The very next, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. You said they cherry pick verses.
They do.
They absolutely. And so I try to tell them, I say, go get a Bible and read it yourself. Since I've learned about, your program, I've started to send them your way, because I said, listen to this guy. He is completely different from all these other churches around here, and see if you find that interesting. And, because so many and here recently I've been finding more that are kind of, you talk on the network a lot about people being kind of in preschool trying to learn about religion. And I'm starting to see more and more that are wanting to graduate to elementary and to high school and stuff like that. So I'm also kind of sitting them that way.
Yeah.
But I think that the evangelistic people I agree with, I think they cherry pick the verses and then everybody has an interpretation of what that is. Well, if they don't like what this person in the church says, they branch and make their own church. So then it's all just getting muddied. And it's like,
that's the essential way of Protestantism. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's why, the Reformation leads to thousands of churches. Because I mean, from a theological point of view, first of all, my reflection on so-called Bible churches, Protestant Bible churches, is they don't read much of the Bible. They've got their favorite books or their favorite bits, but there's no systematic reading of the entire thing. Like in the Catholic Church, in the Orthodox Church, there's a cycle. Like in the Catholic Church, a 3-year cycle where the whole Bible will basically be read
for the most part. Yeah,
but mostly. But certainly, you couldn't accuse them of cherry picking. Right, everything is in there.
Yeah,
and so, so my first reflection
and we can't choose. I think that's the most important part. As Catholics and Orthodox priests and bishops, we can't choose the message for the day like Protestant churches do.
And we can't choose which scripture readings to
we can't just
use the ones in the lectionary.
Exactly. So the lectionary cycle keeps us on task. We're forced into giving the message that the church is giving all throughout the world, which is the beauty of it, is that everyone's getting a reflection on that same passage from Scripture everywhere in the world. That's the beauty. It does.
And then in terms of how you actually should do it, and almost everyone's got access to the internet now, right? So if April, one of your clients is saying there's this particular verse that I'm really having a nightmare with, or it's been a source of trauma, get online and read up. Just put Church Fathers and the Bible reading, and you'll get what St. Augustine of Hippo said about it. You'll get what, and that is a tradition. When we say we're traditional Catholics or traditional Orthodox, that's what we mean. What we mean is, I'm not making it up. I mean, so many times people will say, "Oh, I disagree with what you said in the homily today," and I'll say,
"I'm not saying
you're not disagreeing with me."
Yeah,
as if I came up with this idea.
Yeah.
You're not disagreeing with me. Because it's not me, and that's why I hate like party politics sermon. Whether I agree with them or not, that's not what a priest is there to do. A priest is there to give a homily on the scripture readings of the day or any part of the mass. And it's not his own opinion; it's his own voice and his own, co-creation. There's an art to it, but they're not my ideas. It's not my idea that Jesus rose from the dead.
No.
So a responsible way for somebody to read the scriptures, particularly like the ones that do. Leap out that wives submit to your husband, the ones that are so open to abuse, is to say, what's the church always taught about that?
Well, that's where the magisterium comes in. And see, that's
then you'll discover that your pastor might just be a moron or a corrupted person or an ignoramus or a malintended person. And you can say, well, nice homily, but it's not really what the church teaches, is it? It's not,
I think it's
St. John
important.
Chrysostom disagrees with you.
I think it's important that while we should absolutely read the Bible for ourselves, we have to do that responsibly. It can't just be, I'm going to pick it up and go with it. We have to understand that everything in there has to be understood in context to everything else in there. And the average person does not have, and I say this, and I know it's going to sound insulting, but it's just the truth. The average person does not have the intellectual capacity to do that well. They don't. The average person does not. Or the training. It does take a theologian and somebody that is particularly skilled to be able to keep all of that content together. Okay. I'm not a theologian. I can barely do it at the level I can for my job as a bishop. All right. Even I will defer to the magisterium from time to time when certain particular situations come up where I don't have the answers. And even my knowledge of scripture is not sufficient to fully put that picture together. I still have to defer. So I think we have to read it with as a response, because I do agree completely with what you said regarding, first of all, read it for yourself, because it might not be what you were taught. But at the same time, we have to be able to read it within the context of it, the entire message. And that's very, very, very hard to do, because people are cherry pickers. They are. People will naturally brush over parts that they don't understand and focus in on the parts they do. And then if there's a disconnect between those two realities, they're going to get the message wrong, which is where a lot of this evangelical stuff ends up becoming a type of toxic
it's also
reading.
Where humility is important.
Yeah,
we all have gaps in our knowledge, right?
Correct.
And the best thing to say is, actually, I don't know about that. It's to say, I don't know enough about that.
So the challenge is, though, Father, the challenge is now, as the person who's suffering from this trauma and trying to get over it, reading the Bible for them, who do they choose to believe? And what do they, are they going to go with their tradition? Are they going to go with what their upbringing? Are they going to be like, well, the Catholic Church is the oldest, formal denomination, dare I say denomination, should I listen to them? It becomes harder to make that decision then, because now that becomes, sometimes the cure is worse than the trauma, which is what keeps people from healing. Do you understand what I mean by that, April? I mean, I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah. And people want to stay where they're comfortable. Right. And it's like, if they're going to step out, that's scary to them. And I was going to interject here too, that what you guys are talking about is really great, but I think that a lot of people I deal with are not even anywhere close to that. I'm more at the level of just opening their minds to the idea of maybe what they were taught could be wrong, or that they have the opportunity to even read it themselves. Because I think as a human species, a lot of us are just used to following the flow. And I think when you're teaching people, you don't have to follow that flow. You can think for yourself. You can question things, kind of like what Brandon does. You can ask these questions, and you're not going to be struck down by lightning if that happens. So I think, what you guys is talking about is absolutely on point, but I think that for the people I deal with, and maybe several others that are just realizing some of this trauma that these confining religious beliefs, I think even opening their mind to recognizing that they can think outside of what they were taught.
I think you're definitely on the front line. I think April, you're definitely on the front line compared to us, because if people are reaching out to people like Father Chris and myself, they're probably well beyond the point of, can I even think for myself? I think they're at the point where now they're like, I can, but now how do I go about exercising this new freedom? Whereas you're getting them at the bottom of the barrel, dare I say. You're getting them where they're at their worst point. We would never see them typically at this point, unless it were to be a case where a person's suffering from some kind of potentially demonic issue or a spiritual illness, where they reach out to us.
I think when I was a parish priest in a town, very visible, the only accessible, I really hate this term, but I'll use it for ease, professional Christian. It was fairly common for people to come to me in those situations, whether it was, a grandma whose grandchild is gay and they want to talk that through, or whether, all any manner of things, or, they bring their kids for baptism. And what I was going to say, just to affirm what you said, April, is even if, I'm in that town and I live there, and, I'm accessible, and let's say they like me and they kind of, I'm coming from a good place. Let's say I'm more virtuous than I am, then let's say I'm the ideal parish priest, not actually me. Then even then, with the best will in the world, it takes years to catechize somebody into the place, if it's possible at all, because not everyone's supposed to, has the same IQ. And so yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, even in ideal circumstances, that's a very, very difficult way of bringing somebody through trauma to a place of, if you like, a more nuanced understanding of how these, yes, set and eternal doctrines, how we interact with them as sinful human beings. I mean, it's really hard. It's why we're spread so thin in Australia, right? Because there's almost no Christians. It's very unlikely, by the way, a church would preach something that would force somebody out in this country, because they're so desperate for people to come to church, they wouldn't risk it, right? So it's kind of interesting how the market influences, like, supply and demand, right? But
well, why do you think Joel Osteen fills all the seats? That's why.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and that's why it's such a crisis, right? Because in fact, a functional church would in fact have every member of the congregation would be able to do that with somebody. If they'd been catechized sufficiently, you wouldn't just have one parish priest expert in Christianity to come and helping people rebuild their lives. You'd have a whole church full of people who were able to do that, and they would be seen as salt and light and truth, and that's how a church ought to grow. That's the ideal evangelization, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down. That's where I am. I don't have rich resources full of people to, and actually no bishop in this country does. No matter how, the Archbishop of Sydney doesn't have that at his disposal. So what do you think is the most helpful, given that we don't have those ideal circumstances or necessarily years to spend with a person to help bring them through it? What's the sort of what's the minimum, like not minimum as in I want to do the bare minimum, but what is the very least we ought to be doing to help people to reconstruct what have been very negative experiences, spiritually abusive experiences in the church?
I think the biggest thing is you meet people where they are, and you listen to what they have to say, and just kind of that non-judgmental reaction, and acknowledging what they've been through, and because really it's like a deconstruction of who they were in the scope of this trauma, and then you have to rebuild them into this person who has higher self-esteem and self-worth and that kind of thing. So I think just patience, meeting them where they are, and just being non-judgmental, I think is probably what most of the people thrive off of who are seeking help when it comes to trauma.
I know a lot of folks just
levels.
want someone to talk to, that'll listen to them.
I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
I'm saying a lot of folks just want someone to talk to that will listen to them genuinely and not just dismiss them.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
And I would go ahead and add, we can't really talk about this topic without adding this. I remember a couple of years ago getting back on the subject of priests and pastors. But I remember hearing a couple years ago that there was a particular pastor in Middle to Eastern Tennessee that during one of his sermons called publicly for the execution of people of the LGBT community. And I actually found the website here.
Is that Locke?
Well, yeah, I can go ahead and say the church. It's called the All Scripture Baptist Church.
Oh, okay. No, it's not him.
Apparently, they have over 1,400 Facebook reviews.
So it's all scripture, but they completely omitted Matthew chapter 7, correct. I see, right? That's how that works. Okay. Got it.
Yes.
Advocating for the deaths of people. And they think that's okay.
I got to find
It's not funny. I'm not laughing because it's funny.
I know, I get you.
It's so horrible.
It's just...
So
Albert Camus has nothing on these
Like
people.
I said, Father, yes, America has held it together, but for largely the wrong reasons.
Continue, Brandon. Sorry.
I think this right here also goes back to a dogmatic perspective of the Bible, because right here quoted from the preacher of this church, quote, "We believe that sodomy, homosexuality is a sin that is against nature. A person will only burn in their lust toward the same gender if they have been given over to reprobate or rejected mind. God said homosexuality should be punished with the death penalty as set forth in Leviticus 20, verse 13. No homosexuals will be allowed to attend or join our church."
So that,
They
that's
don't
not
want to,
necessarily
so it's
calling for the murder of. It's not necessarily calling for the murder of homosexuals. It's saying that Leviticus did have the death penalty in play for it.
Yeah.
So which is why it's not illegal, right? Because otherwise it'd be incitement.
I don't know. I think you could get away with it.
Oh, yeah.
I think you could get. What could your law enforcement? What could you do if a church made a declaration that all homosexuals should die? You couldn't do much.
Are you threatening a particular person?
That
Yeah.
you'd have to threaten a
There has to
particular
be-
individual.
There has to be
Yep.
a particular target, and there has to be an overt act.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, you can say whatever the hell you want,
Right.
as obviously they have.
In
Yeah.
English law, we have a beautiful phrase, very English: an act more than merely preparatory.
Yeah, that's a fancy. Never mind. That's that English fancy talk.
English fancy talk. Oh, well, you know, see, look, this is the thing, okay? And it is the biggest problem, okay? Because this is a great way of demonstrating and illustrating what April's here to talk about, you know, or we've been talking about for the last 2 hours. It is people that somehow think that they're in with God. They've got the secret. They're on the inside, and they can now speak for him because they're doing what they think the Bible
They're
says.
the furthest away.
And there's so many verses that come to mind. You know, the one I shared with Brandon not too long ago. You know, not everyone that says "Lord, Lord" will. I'll be like I never knew you. You know that verse. I forget the actual.
But even that verse they quote from Leviticus.
Yeah.
If you know, have a look at it, right?
Yeah.
Actually, liberal Christians don't help when they don't study these things. That was about the practice war when a tribe conquered another tribe, they would rape the men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that verse is about that.
And
it's
again,
saying, actually, if you're going to be Israelites, you're not doing that. You know, and so it's about saying if we're going to be identified as God's chosen people, we're not going to take part in that practice of humiliating their men by raping them. That's not the way for us. That's what that's about. Now, we don't live in those sorts of cultures anymore. That's not something that certainly Western people do in war, although we've just seen other people do. So to compare that to what they are actually addressing is they're not the same subject. They might involve the same act, but it's not the same subject.
April, what do you think about the role that guilt plays in this, particularly as it applies to maybe like, I know we have a lot of veterans that we see from time to time that have been in war and, you know, had to commit what they come back to feel were atrocities because maybe they had to kill some people. Maybe even innocent people got killed and they witnessed it or were participants in it somehow. And then there's now guilt that comes with that. And so they come back and they want a relationship with God, but they don't feel, because of all of these dogmatisms that inevitably get in the way, they don't feel that there's really a place for them within the church, or they don't feel that. That's another type, I guess you could say, of religious trauma, but a very unique one. What would you think about that, or how would you deal with that?
I mean, that's a hot mess, to be
Yeah.
quite honest with it.
Yeah.
But the truth of it is it's kind of the same thing, because no matter what the trauma is, there's always guilt involved.
Yeah.
And and I would agree that, with the veterans, they have a hard time. They have a lot of stuff that they're dealing with. Just the loss of their brothers or sisters at arms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So as far as the guilt, it kind of goes back to, like looking at that situation, trying to help them realize they were doing what they're supposed to do. They're doing, what is their guilt? Is there really guilt there? And then, it's kind of that deconstructing those beliefs that they build up around themselves and just kind of rebuilding it into a more healthy perspective.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
it does. It does, because I mean, there's two sides to this topic, really, and this one is focusing on really the psychological approach versus how we would handle things perhaps from the clerical side. And it's sometimes hard to play both sides of that coin. I'm glad that I don't have to. I'm glad there's people like you that do that side, so I don't have to, and I would, like I said, I don't typically see people in that condition anyway. By the time they get to me, they've already healed some. They're ready to start having those conversations again, usually. So that makes it a little easier on my end. And then once they come in and they see what I'm all about, once they get to know this church and they get to know my approach to the Gospels, then they start to get more comfortable, because then they realize that, yeah, it says these things, but it doesn't say these things the way you think it says them and for the reasons it says them, and it doesn't necessarily apply to you the way that you've been taught it applies to you. I think one of the most important message I've been giving people over the years to help them get over religious trauma is that, yes, I mean, we can't avoid the reality of sin, the consequence of sin, but we don't necessarily have to see it as punishment. That's where the semantics got it wrong, horribly wrong. It is not punishment. God's not like so angry at you that now, there's retribution. Now that he's going to make you suffer.
Looking for one reason to throw you in hell.
Yes.
Just one reason.
Yeah. People are shocked when
that's why he died on a cross for you.
I know, right?
He wants you to go to hell.
Yeah. People are shocked when I tell them, look, the only way to get to hell, right? Hell's a reality. As a bishop, I don't only have to say that. I know this through.
And I don't believe it's empty either.
I don't believe it's empty. But at the same time, I will say this. Nobody gets there who didn't choose it. You choose this. And it's not accidental. It's not like I wasn't good enough and so I ended up there. It's not like Brandon was saying, if he didn't ask forgiveness the perfect way every night, then he could die in his sleep and end up there. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. You send yourself to hell. The only role God has in that is trying to save you from yourself. And that's the part that I think once people are ready to make that connection, after they've had some healing with your approach and what you have to do, April, then perhaps they're in a position to come and hear that message from someone like me, assuming there's a lot of me out there saying it, which I don't think there is, unfortunately. But, that's why I do this show.
It's why the cardinal sins always relate to that selfishness, right?
Yes.
Because, pride, gluttony, these are all the things that tend to lead us to, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, the temptation to focus so much on yourself and your own inadequacies and get twisted. And that's when you start judging yourself against other people and looking for the logs and specks, which is why the safest way to avoid that self-corruption that leads to becoming evil, basically, it is, instead of comparing yourself to other people, which, in a way, if a church puts on there, you're going to go to hell and you're going to go to hell, it's like, Oprah who gets a car, then what they're doing is they are comparing themselves to you. And the way to avoid that is to not compare yourself to somebody else, is to compare yourself to you yesterday.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And so that's really a healthy spirituality. And if you are going to compare yourself to another human being, okay, then compare yourself to someone that the church has declared a saint. Because then you're imitating somebody who, the entire third party of the church has said, actually, the things that they've written are worth looking at.
Worth looking at.
So you're not going to go too far, right? So I do want to quickly read, and then I'll shut up. Quickly read. Marina shared something with us from St. Paisios, who's just been made the patron of Australia late last year by the Greek Orthodox Church. And this is the quote. So thanks, Marina. Do not believe your thoughts, neither when they tell you that you're terrible, nor when they tell you that you are a saint. And I think that's a really, really good way of avoiding that kind of self-obsession that is the spiral down to hell, because that way you're avoiding either your self-talk that says I'm the worst person in the world and I can't be saved, which is an act of pride, because there's Christ on the cross dying for everyone apart from you. How special are you? But the converse of that, which is no one's as good as me, I'm fantastic. Both of those thoughts lead you towards hell because they lead you away from the truth.
And see, unfortunately, part of the watered down theology of the Protestant Reformation is a large part of the issue there, because when you took works out of the equation of salvation and reduce it down to a faith alone approach, or worse yet, a predestination, Calvinism type of approach, then you basically render a person largely powerless, because faith is a gift. All right. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You can't acquire it by will. You can't choose to have it. Either God gives it to you or you don't have it, but you don't acquire it. It is a gift. It's a gift of the Holy Spirit. It's one of the gifts, one of the charismata, actually. Faith, hope, and love. But, faith is one of the gifts. And so if a person has no faith, how awful is it to hear that there's no hope now? Because what do? What does a person without faith do when you're being told that this is the only thing that can save you and you don't have the capacity for it yet? You haven't acquired, the gift hasn't been given to you. We can do things about that with building a relationship with God, but if works isn't part of it, then that's not going to help you, right? Because you're being taught that doesn't help, that you can't, because they see that as some kind of meriting when it's not meriting. It has nothing to do with merit. It has to do with relationship, which is a whole other matter.
And a healthy approach to self-mortification. Right?
Yes.
I know that the Da Vinci Code, tried to put the nail in the coffin of self-mortification with the psilus and bleeding legs and all the rest of it. But, they're done appropriately and without, abuse, control, all those things. We're told, for example, St. John Paul II wore a psilus.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Now, he never, ever spoke about it. We didn't know until after he died. It would have been wrong for him to have said, I'm the Pope and I wear a psilus, you should all wear one, right? That would have been abusive. But the idea that actually we can, and it's something that you should be very careful about and always speak to a priest or a spiritual father about these sorts of things before you try them. But but even things like going without food or, for the sake of wanting to suffer to experience something of Christ's sacrifice for you. Those things are also good, but they're also things that are almost fallen out of use, even amongst Catholics and not so much the Orthodox. But the idea that we would there is a healthy way to sort of control our passions that might lead us astray by. I
think a lot of it depends on how. I think a lot of it depends on your quality of life. Honestly, I think the Pope lives a comfortable life. So I think for someone that lives such a comfortable life by default, they can benefit from something like self-mortification. But, I think for the average person, life is mortifying enough. I don't know if they get more benefit from doing more to themselves than just life gives you automatically.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
You know, it is not to say, oh, you know, you'll end up being so grateful you were abused. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that the mortifying effect of that abuse, and one that you need psychological help with. You know, I mean, I'm with you. Unless your priest happens to also be a psychoanalyst or psychotherapist, then you need a therapist as well. And even if they are, you need to separate those things.
Speaking of which, April, I want to give you the last couple minutes here to, I guess, tell the audience whatever you want them to know about you, or ways to contact you if you're interested in having the audience reach out and ask you questions. Whatever you want to say, you got about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to say it.
Well, if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to send me an email, and that's my first name dot my last name, which is NORROD.LPC@gmail.com. And I'm welcome. Be welcome to answer any questions. Of course, I can't do therapy because I'm only licensed in Tennessee, but hopefully maybe I could help connect you with somebody if you're in another state or whatever, another country. I don't know how that would work, but maybe I could help with that as well. The last thing I would want to say is that when it comes to dealing with trauma, it's the biggest thing that you have to work on is instilling some sort of hope. And if you can get them to see hope that things can be better and that life is going to be different on the other side, I think that's the best thing for them. And that's kind of what I spend most of my time doing, is trying to help them see there is things can be better down the road. You got to keep working at it. And, you know, I think that's what we all are here for, is just to instill some kind of hope.
Well said. And you're going to be back on a little later in the season to talk about the paranormal, because you also are into paranormal investigation. I'm sure our audience, you know, is going to love to hear from that, because that's one of their passions, I think. And
I want to say one thing real quick.
Yes.
I want to give a shout out to Brandon, because he, you know, talked me up, and I'll pay you with ranch later, I promise.
Ken Steakhouse only. I do not do that.
I gotcha.
Well, I just want to thank you for being on the show, April, and of course, Brandon and Father Chris. Jamie, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be able to have these conversations with all of you. It's such a blessing to me, and hopefully our audience feels the same way. We'll be back next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. JJ is returning. JJ Johnson. We're going to talk about demonology and the Hebrew Bible. So I know that's going to be
so there must be a thunderstorm coming.
Yes, because every time we have him on, it crashes the system. Hopefully the third time's the charm, right? But we're going to have him on next week to discuss that. I think it should be a fantastic topic, as always. But look us up on the internet to keep an idea as to when our demonology program will be opened up to you. And then we can start talking about taking on students and opening up new divisions around the world to hopefully reach more people. Anyway, we will see you next week, but until then, I'll see you out there in the ether. God bless everyone.
God bless.